Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for hanging out here tonight for our next session of Let's Talk About It. If you've been with us the last 3-4 weeks, whatever it is, you would know that these weeks are just to focus really on trying to think biblically about some of the topics that are out there in just life and culture today. And so we've been bringing in some guests just to speak into our life and encourage us and help us to think biblically about these things. And so we've talked about politics, and we've talked about just some of those crucial conversations that parents should have with their kids and grandparents, talked about the porn epidemic, and today talking about the topic of mental health. And this is an important conversation to have, isn't it? Because I think on many levels, really, probably most all of us deal with this on some level. And so it's helpful to think about it biblically. So we're going to hit it from a few different angles here this evening. Do want to let you know that towards the end, we will have a question and answer time. So again, if you've been here the last few weeks, there's a text line that's popping up here momentarily, and you can text in those questions around the topic of mental health, and they should come to me right here. And towards the end, we'll try to have some different questions that Dena can kind of help us navigate. So encourage you just to grab your phone, text those questions right to there. And Kayla, Dena wouldn't say this about herself, but Dena is uniquely qualified. Dena Stone, and is uniquely qualified really to have this conversation with us.
Yeah, Dena is, she is a counselor, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, specializes in trauma and working with families that just go through fostered adoption, all that goes with that. She speaks all across the country at conferences in this specific field, and is just really highly regarded in our community. And we love her, we respect her, we're thankful for her heart to just mix together ministry and mental health, and it's really a gift. And so her and I got to teach a class together, if you were there, Winning the War in Your Mind, and that was awesome. So we're just really honored and thankful to have her.
Yeah, so Kayla and I are going to kind of co-host here tonight around this one. So let's kick off here then, Dena, as we kind of start this conversation about just, what is mental health? What does it really encompass? And then really along with that, there can be a bit of a stigma around Christianity and mental health. And maybe, why is that, do you think? And so kind of what is it? Why is there a bit of a stigma around Christianity and mental health? And then kind of how should Christians think biblically about this topic? And so can you just kind of just help us in some of those areas?
Just some of those little questions?
Just some of those small areas. And so take it for the next hour on that right there. No.
Okay, I can do that. So people who work from a mental health professional standpoint are generally licensed in the field. So they attend graduate school for 3 to 5 years. They do internships, they have supervision, and then they're licensed by the state. And that is the difference, say, between a licensed mental health counselor and a lay counselor or a pastoral counselor, is the training that they've received and the supervision, and then licensure by the state. When people generally come to see me as a mental health counselor, it's because they've encountered something in their story, something in their life that they're finding unmanageable. So that could be situational things, loss, trauma, anxieties that are coming up because of outside issues, stressors in life, or it could be because they have some biological, genetical tendencies towards anxiety, depression, mental health issues. And they're just finding that even at their best, making their best efforts, doing all due diligence, seeking out help and support in other areas, they're just not resolving that discomfort. They're not living as well and as fully as they would like to live. And so that's when people generally seek me out. What I've encountered, I have my undergraduate and my first graduate degree is in theology and ministry, and then my second master's degree is in counseling from a seminary. So I come at counseling from the perspective of both a clinical psychologist and somebody with a strong, passionate respect for the authority and the Word of God. And I feel like I've been so privileged to be able to bring together those two aspects of care and to help people imagine what health is, asking the question, not just sort of this internal question of What do you want? What do you need? What is God's call on your life? What is his best vision for you? Where is he calling you to surrender or to grow? Where would he like to join you in the process of grief? Where have you experienced things in your past that maybe you haven't let God speak into? And how do we integrate both an understanding of how our brain and our biology interacts with our spirituality as well? That's what really gets me excited about working with people.
Yeah, I have felt like, biblical counselors are such good gifts to the body of Christ, because even when people might come to me, can I meet with you? Absolutely. I think in my mind, there's pastoral encouragement, pastoral prayer, pastoral support, but then there's also, to your point, a training and an expertise that maybe a counselor have that I wouldn't have. So if those things can come together, man, that can often kind of just encourage people down the right path. So counselors are good gifts to the body of Christ. Yeah, but there can be a bit of a stigma around Christianity and mental health. Well, why do you think that is?
Boy, that's a book. I think at the most basic level, there's been a healthy distrust of secular education. There's been a healthy distrust of secular psychology that has tended to historically be this very look inside yourself for the truth, honor and value yourself first, as opposed to a more spiritually or biblically informed, which is look to God's vision for wholeness, for healing. Identify not just your desires, but where God is calling you and pushing you. So I think that tension has existed. And it's both ways. The secular world is pretty suspicious of faith, right? And so anybody who claims that faith is part of their health or their healing, you tend to get a little bit of cynicism around that. And then likewise, you've had, unfortunately, some historical interactions between the church and secular psychology that have been pretty antagonistic. And so there's been a question in a lot of people's mind of, is counseling biblical? Is it okay for a believer to seek help outside of the pastoral context, outside of the Word of God, outside of prayer? And the best, the place that I've come to in answering that is just historically, biblically, we see throughout the ages, as early as the first century church, and before that, in the writings of the psalmist and even the prophets, right? People who seek out wisdom from other people, people who surrender their authority to somebody, whether that's a prophet, whether that's a priest, and the sort of the prophetic role of speaking truth into someone's life. Boy, those prophets weren't always very well liked.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes a good counselor will find his or herself also not really well liked, because they do say some of the hard things as opposed to just affirming or confirming somebody's pre-existing set of beliefs.
Gotcha. Yeah. Good. Well, talk about this. Sometimes, Christians can maybe feel guilty or really feel a sense of shame over having, say, anxiety, depression, other mental health challenges. And so can you speak, to that, to where like, maybe you guys have felt this before that are watching on YouTube. It's like, well, I shouldn't have anxiety. I shouldn't have worry. I shouldn't have depression. I'm a Christian, right? I shouldn't struggle with these things, And so can you maybe offer some words of encouragement or hope or help to those who kind of reaffirm them in that way?
Yeah, I think primarily we start at a place where we fully believe and surrender to the truth that God knows us, that he made us. Therefore, he knows our biology, he knows our brain chemistry, he knows what happens in the internal workings of the being that he designed. So it's no shock or surprise or disappointment to God that some of us are going to struggle with an anxiety disorder. Some of us are going to struggle with depression. Some of us have a genetic predisposition to a personality disorder or a borderline personality disorder or a bipolar disorder, and all of the things that we've come to understand as having very clear genetic links. God's not surprised by that. He's fully aware of how he made us. And so I think what happens when we stay in this place of shame is such a destroyer, right? It's where truth can't be accessed. It's where the light doesn't get allowed in. And so a lot of times I'm sad that I meet with people who are really at their most desperate place, and they're like, I don't even know if it's okay for me to come to you as a Christian, but here I am, and I feel shame that I even need help. And that place of breaking the bond of shame, I think, is where we allow God's light to shine in. When we stay isolated, when we stay in shame, I don't see as much opportunity for healing to occur.
I think that there's like a natural pride too, whenever we do walk through these kinds of seasons of just, I think there's that will in our own minds sometimes of I'm stronger than this, like I've got this, or just even the reassurance of if anybody knows that I'm walking through that, I'll have to reassure them that like I'm saved, like I love Jesus, like I am a Christian, like please know, like I am saved, but I'm just walking through this. And I think just even the fear of that can delay or keep people in that place for so long. When we talked about last week, bringing things into the light is where we can be free, is where we can start to experience healing. And I think that step is so important.
Go ahead, babe.
Yeah, every week we get prayer requests, and I'm always every week we see people that are walking through this. Multiple people walking through great anxieties, depression, whatever it might be. And my heart goes out to them because that was my story too. When Jeff and I were first married, there was a lot of transitions. I think we faced maybe 4 of the major stressors in life. At that time, there was a death in the family that was shocking. And then we got engaged, got married, we moved, and then we moved again. And then I had like a traumatic accident that happened, and this is all within like a year. And so all of a sudden I was having numbness that was over my scalp area and numbness in my legs. And I remembered thinking, what in the world is going on with me? There's MS in the family. Am I getting MS? So I went to the doctor. They did a couple tests for that, and it wasn't MS. Then we moved to a new area and went to the doctor there, and he says, I think you have anxiety. And I thought, my immediate reaction was, what? I'm a Christian. I'm not supposed to worry. And so that was my immediate reaction. I felt like guilty, and I felt like, what's wrong with me? Like, why did I, but it was so helpful when they explained to me that sometimes, our normal worries that we go through, sometimes when you go through a lot of different things like this, it can surface and present itself in different ways in your body. And so I went for the next year, and I ended up getting some help with that. In fact, they did put me on a medicine for that year, and it was helpful. It was helpful for me, and then I was able to wean off of it. And do I still tend towards anxiety sometimes? Absolutely. He would attest to that. Do I still look to the Lord in it all? Absolutely. I've hidden His word in my heart. Like I read the scriptures in such a personal way when it's talking about think on these things, when it's talking about don't be anxious about anything, and to present our requests to the Lord, and to have thankful heart, and all these different things. I mean, I do all those things, and I know that God hears me and meets me. And so that was kind of my experience with that. It was an initial feeling of what? But then just seeing, and I had a friend at the church who also was going through it, and she says, Carrie, it's okay. She's like, I realize there's people that have diabetes or whatever, and they need insulin or different things. She's like, and we just need a little bit of help, So that was helpful and reassuring to me.
And I think we understand biblically that part of the way that God meets us is through other people, that He puts us in community, He puts us in relationships. Sometimes those are very informal, organic relationships where people speak healing into our lives. And then sometimes we seek out professional and intentional relationships for that for letting God minister to us in that way as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, now, Dena, you correct me. When I'm wrong, you correct me, okay? So step in here. Because I feel like, I mean, we live in a fallen, broken world, right? So God created the world perfect, but then sin enters, which means we are broken people. And that results in a brokenness in a lot of different ways, including sometimes emotionally and relationally, even mentally. And so we do live in a fallen, broken state. We're not in heaven yet. Right. And as long as we're on earth, we're going to wrestle with life and stuff, right? I mean, this is just kind of part of like the human condition. Yeah. We're not in our perfected state, quite yet. And so there is the reality of that. And I do think even about Elijah in 1 Kings 19, this like super awesome prophet, man of God, amazing. And he just has this massive spiritual victory on Mount Carmel. And the Bible says in 1 Kings 19:4, he literally says that he sat under a tree and prayed that he might die. And so super spiritual people navigate all of these things that we're talking about. And the Bible also says, and I hope I'm not butchering this, that, there's wisdom in a multitude of counsel. You know what I'm saying? And so that's, I think, covers a lot of different areas, including just seeking professional wisdom counsel.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we fall into the more secular way of thinking where we do separate the brain from the heart, from the psyche. But God says that we're made in his image and we are an integrated self. We don't have a separate body from emotions, from heart. And so because of the fall, we know that our world is impacted by disease, right? In the garden, Adam and Eve walked in the presence of God and they were never going to die because there was no illness, there was no death, there was no disease. With the fall came the introduction of death and the introduction of disease. That is true for our brains as well as our kidneys, right? For the organ located in your body, it is a physical organ. So, I laugh sometimes when people sort of have that dismissive comment of, oh, it's all in your head. And I'm like, well, that is where your brain is located. It's in your head. And it is an organ that is as important to your functioning as your liver or your kidney. And if somebody had kidney disease, we would get them care. And if somebody had liver disease, we would not feel shame about medicating that. And yet this organ in our brain, in our head, right, it functions biologically, even though it has emotional or psychological results as well. And so that separation is false.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Let's hit a couple of these things that maybe people have heard about or wondering about. Is it okay, and I think we know the answer, but let's just expound on it a bit. Is it okay for Christians to seek counseling, and why? Again, we talked a bit about it, but maybe can you expound on that a little bit? So should Christians have any hesitancy about seeking out counseling? Then maybe along with that is just some wisdom for seeking out a counselor if you do, because there's some danger there.
Yes. Some therapists are loony. There are some weirdos out there, guys. And it really, in the same way that if you have cancer, you're going to go find the best cancer doctor you can find, right? And you're going to interview a couple people before you settle on care. I think the same thing is true for mental health. You are the customer, and so you actually need to go and interview a therapist, ask the questions, get reassurance about their answers. While I do think it's possible, and I've experienced this personally, for a secular counselor to do really good work and to be professional and to be ethical, I go in to see a secular counselor with my faith deeply rooted. And so I'm not likely to be swayed or influenced in a way apart from my faith. When people are in crisis, they tend to be less stable, right? All of us know that I don't know about you guys, but I make dumb decisions when I'm afraid. And I do impulsive things when I'm tired. So there is wisdom in knowing your own personal vulnerability to the influence of another person. When it comes to children, I believe really strongly you need to have somebody who's like-minded. They're going to support your parenting and your values, and you're not going to let your child meet with somebody who doesn't affirm your worldview. because that influence is a really powerful influence. I'll also say Yakima is a hard place. There's not a great resource. That we were limited in our resources. And when people call me and ask me for referrals, it's very hard for me because there aren't a lot of people. Either there are people who are maybe more what's called Christian counseling, which tends to be more biblically based and less clinically based. And unfortunately, they sometimes overlook or miss the clinical symptoms. Or you have people who are very clinical but don't respect or uphold faith. And both of those places, of course, have some risk involved.
We'll do some Q&A here later on, but this just question kind of jives with that. As a believer, what are some things we should look for in a counselor? And specifically, what questions should we ask when looking for a counselor? Yeah. Can you maybe speak to that? Because that one speaks right to that there. What questions should we ask when looking for a counselor?
So really basic things are, what is your education? What's your degree? Where'd you go to school? Because if it's from some off the box of a crackerjack box, like you're probably not somebody I'm going to have as much trust in as somebody that I know went to a university that I respect or recognize. So the quality of their education, their experience, how long have they been working? There are some really, really good people who are new to the practice, but just don't have the breadth of experience. And so depending upon sort of where you are in your struggles, you may not want to work with somebody who's a year out of school. And then I think you really want to ask the hard questions of whether they affirm your faith, whether they can support you in those decisions. Are they conversant in it? I work with people all the time who are not believers, and I'm comfortable with that, and I'm conversant with them not needing to bring faith into the session. But for people, so if the counselor is not a practicing Christian, are they antagonistic towards faith, right? Like you want to know if they can support you and walk alongside you with that. And you have every right, again, as a customer, to ask that question and to walk away. The other thing I would say is that what I have found, it's my 21st year of practice. The thing that I have found most important in all of the work that I do with people is whether or not we click. And that's something that's hard to put your finger on, right? It's not a really tangible. But if you have a couple sessions with somebody and you're like, it just doesn't seem to be a good fit, trust your gut, right? Walk out of that room, say thank you very much, I'm going to pursue another path. Because if you don't actually trust the person you're working with and feel an alliance with that person, whether they're the smartest person or the least educated person, is going to make no difference. So that relational issue is a really important part of choosing a counselor.
On a really small level of that, it's kind of like picking a hairstylist for all the girls, right? Like, you need to click with the person who's doing your hair, right? Like, you trust them with a lot, but this is way more important. It just made me think about that.
But the trust issue,
right? But the trust issue,
put
right?
My hair in your hair.
I trust you.
I trust my barber.
My hair.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking about that. Is it okay for Christians to seek counseling? And I think Christianity as a whole, and maybe if you guys agree or don't agree, I think that we've taken great strides at normalizing our need for help when there's a need for help. And I think, Dena, you said something yesterday when we were meeting, that being preventative is better than being reactive. And I think when it comes to, if we're walking through crisis, if we feel like something's off, if we've just experienced something really hard and we're not getting through it the way that we normally get through it, I think, when I've gone through experiences like that, I've thought to myself, I could wait till I just wake up one morning and have a panic attack and can't get out of bed, or I can talk to someone about it before that happens. And really just, we love God and we trust him, but also there are people who know things that we don't know that can help us. And I think, as far as I really think it speaks to the strength of a Christian to be able to seek help versus the weakness of a Christian to not seek help. And I think, that's even something in my own life that I've just been on a journey of really having tremendous respect when people can say, there's not a green light in my mind right now. I'm kind of like at a yellow light. And before I crash and burn, I probably should seek a multitude of counsel, and seek some wisdom. And so I think that's something to respect and to be commended, I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the people that I work with, I hold such profound respect for. People who are willing to be vulnerable with me, to extend trust to me. And then I'll tell you, some of the people, they do some of the hardest work on my little blue couch. I mean, you see people be courageous and be bold and be vulnerable, and that's hard work. And so I just personally have such admiration for people who come and seek and receive care.
Yeah, I think we want the Christian community to feel like it's okay to not be okay.
Absolutely.
Right? I think on our best days as a church, right? It's like it's okay to not be okay. We talk about we're all in process, right? And so that's good. Let's talk about maybe something else that might come up that is important. Let's talk about medicine. And so is it okay for a Christian to take medicine? And let's think about this from a couple different angles. Can you talk about like kids? And so let's say you've got elementary school, J-high, high school. Is it okay for them to be prescribed medicine? And then you've got the other end where I had a friend who was just a bit concerned. I don't think his kids were living in Yakima at the time because he felt like they were quick to prescribe medicine when his kids were J-high, somewhere around there. So talk about the whole, okay, if they say we think your junior high, high school should be on medicine, how should we feel about that?
There's a couple different ways to answer that question. One way to answer it is from the more familial, genetic, what you know about your relatives, right? So if you know that you have family members and there's a history of chronic mental health issues in your family, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be wiser to support a child medically sooner rather than later. Because what we can actually do is prevent trauma, prevent self-harm, prevent self-medicating. I would say that's my biggest argument why I'm supportive of young people using medication. They're going to medicate their pain. They're going to do that some way or another. They're going to use porn, they're going to smoke weed, they're going to turn to alcohol. And so some people that I work with have expressed concerns like, I hate to start my kids on medicine because I feel like I'm teaching them that there's a pill that's going to solve their problems. First thing I would say is most people who take meds are always just a little bit disappointed that it's not as effective as they hoped it would be. First of all, they're very afraid to start meds. And then when they do start meds, they're like, oh, that's it? Because medicine, when used well, does not change personality, does not change temperament, does not change faith or worldview. Most people will say, especially those who work with anxiety or antidepressants, will say it gives them a margin back that they had lost. That trauma and stressors has depleted their biology and their brain of the chemicals that help us regulate stress and anxiety, and that medication used properly just gives people back the ability to access their own margin again. I work with a lot of children who have severe trauma and a lot of children who have come through neglectful situations and children who were exposed prenatally to drugs and alcohol. That population, 110%, will need medication. And without medication, they self-harm, they blow up their relationships, they feel self-contempt. When children start hating themselves, they start burning the house down. And so that's when I move as a professional towards medication for children. The minute that I start to sense, oh, you really hate yourself. You really struggle with self-contempt. That's when we do everything we can to put a marker in place to help them come out of that self-contempt.
Gotcha. Talk to us about, okay, so you're in a season of anxiety, depression, the importance of not making big decisions during that season.
Yeah, I mean, don't we all want to solve a problem? And so when stuff starts to feel chaotic, or we start to feel overwhelmed, or we start to feel like we're at the end of our rope, or maybe we've encountered a trauma, right? And the result of trauma for an awful lot of us is that sense of hypervigilance and fear. As a parent, we want to pull in and protect everybody. As a partner, as a friend, we want to sort of circle the wagons when we're feeling anxious or when we've been traumatized. And in case you guys aren't aware of this, none of you in this room are going to escape this planet without trauma, right? The nature of living on a broken planet means that you're going to experience things you were never built to experience. And your biology is going to react to that in ways that are going to be confusing or hard or difficult. Back to the question. We encourage people, say they've had a death in the family or they've experienced a major trauma, we encourage people not to make any big decisions for about 6 months. Just out of the recognition that because you're anxious, because you're fearful, because you're feeling self-protective, your decisions aren't going to be as full-bodied, as resourced, as intentional as they might be when you're not feeling as much stress or anxiety.
I think one of the things we talked about that is something that's big in our culture, I think right now, is there's this need or desire or tendency, maybe is the right word, towards hanging on to labels. And it's like, if somebody has gone through a season of anxiety or a season of depression, they might hold on to that and just say, I have anxiety. And 3 years, 4 years, 5 years down the road, I have anxiety, I have depression. And I think while that can be the reality, I think that there are going to be times, and we talked about seasons of that, that then, Carrie, to your point, where then we can come out of that. And so something that we're experiencing temporarily might not be a forever thing. And I think it's so important. I know I went through a really hard experience, and exactly what you're describing, almost like a PTSD from that experience. And I remember just considering things that I would have never considered. Like, I don't think I trust my kids to be in school. I think I need to pull them out of school. I think I need to homeschool them. So that means I probably need to quit my job. I probably need to just work from home. And I'm like going down this whole road, right? I trust no one, fire all babysitters, like they're never leaving my house. And it really took some perspective to just say, that's how I feel because of what happened. That's not how I'm going to feel forever. And I think that wisdom of don't make any decisions immediately after an experience like that. 6 months down the road, oh yeah, I love my job. Oh yeah, I love my kids' school. I love their teachers. And really grateful that I didn't make those decisions in that kind of, we talk about biologically, you're kind of in a fight or flight mode after hard experiences, and you can't trust the decisions you make in fight or flight mode. And so I think, those are seasons that we've got to navigate slowly and with wisdom, for sure.
And what that also brings to mind, I hope this is an appropriate time to mention it, there are, I'm not sure how I would phrase it exactly, there are levels of disorder, right? So a lot of us are going to experience situational anxiety or depression. Don't dismiss that, don't ignore that, care well for that. Some of us are going to have more genetic tendencies to a clinical depression or a clinical anxiety or some other disorders. Also, of course, seek care for that. Some people are going to experience severe mental health crises, and these are the people who, are on our streets walking around unable to care for themselves or communicate. So we're talking about psychosis, and we're talking about schizophrenia. Those numbers for the general population are pretty small, but at the same time, we tend to lump all mental health into one category. And I would just want to say there's different, I hate to say the word levels because I don't in any way want to imply importance or validity. But most people who come to see me at one point in time will say something to the extent of, "Am I crazy?" And that's a real fear. Like when your body is doing things and your brain is doing things and you're responding in ways that you don't understand in yourself, there's this deep fear that I'm losing my mind, like I'm losing it. Mostly I want to assure people, like, no, you're actually having a really normal response to trauma or to loss or to sorrow. And then for those people who are experiencing these more mental health crises, the type of intervention is going to be different than the type of intervention that I generally provide on a day-to-day basis. And we really want to get behind and support people who might need hospitalization or who are going to go into some type of acute crisis care. And they're going to need resources that are different than, I think I'm going to start seeing a counselor weekly.
Let's talk about some wisdom for parents, can we? So parents who are here, who are hearing all this, and of course, love and adore their kids and grandkids. So wisdom for parents and grandparents here. So mental health diagnoses, especially anxiety, are really skyrocketing at an all-time high for kids and youth today. I mean, some of the stats say 1 in 4 kids and 1 in 3 adolescents are battling anxiety and some of these things, and maybe girls are twice as likely as boys. And so, why are we seeing such a rise in kind of some of these mental health challenges today? And someone asked as well, is there an increase in anxiety in young adults more so after COVID than before? That was a question they had. But just, can you speak to, it's kind of, man, why are we seeing such an increase?
Right, because there's been an explosion of mental health disorders amongst young children and adolescents. There's a couple key factors that we point to. One is COVID, the disruption of that and the uncertainty of that. And for kids, structure and predictability and continuity, like that's so much what they need to be well and to thrive and to grow. And so that disruption in really a generation of kids, we continue to see the fallout from some of that. You also see just sort of societally the different ways people responded to COVID, and not at all in a judgment kind of statement way, but some people responded very fearfully and isolated. Other people responded in anger. I mean, there's just so many different responses, and kids are, of course, downstream from all of us adults. And so you do see sort of this generation post-COVID experiencing a lot more anxiety. What we know, though, that's more profound than COVID and is more profound than any other social influence on children's mental health is smartphones and social media. And there is a direct correlation to the increase in mental health disorders amongst children and adolescents with the advent of personal handheld devices and access to social media. So when we talk about helping kids, we talk preventatively, and then we talk about care once there are problems. One of the most successful things you can do as a parent to prevent mental health disorders is to put your kids on a fierce and firm diet when it comes to phone access and social media access. The comparison culture, the bullying culture, the shame culture, the sexual identity culture, the drug and alcohol culture. I mean, it is terrifying that children who don't go looking for bad things, 1, 2, 3 clicks later are there. And once you've exposed a child's brain to images, I mean, we talked about this in the previous class, like you're forming pathways, you're creating neural pathways in children that aren't going to be undone without a lot of very intentional work. So the best thing you can do to protect your children from mental health disorders is to take away their technology. Do not give them handheld devices in their bedrooms. Do not let them take computers into their rooms. Do not allow televisions behind shut doors. Limit their amount of screen time. Put a parental app on every device that enters your home and check it daily. It is a truckload of work to parent kids today because of the realities of how destructive this is to their mental health.
So let's that is super good, isn't it? So let's shotgun some of these things to be sure we get.
Half of you want to shoot me, the other half of you.
So we're saying phones are a real concern for kids and their mental health today. So for sure, the parental control apps on them. For sure, no phones in the bedroom, no computers in the bedroom. How about TVs in the bedroom?
No.
No TVs in the bedroom?
Because what you can access on TV today, we wouldn't have dreamed of when we were kids,
Okay.
So I tend to limit any of that stuff. Because basically what we've done is we've allowed children to create their own private universe. And it doesn't have parental authority and it doesn't have parental input. And they don't have the wisdom or the discernment or the self-control to manage any of that. I would put a loaded gun into a child's hand before I would put an unfiltered cell phone into a child's hand. This is so secretive.
Jeff, you've done a really good job just kind of describing, I think the immediate reaction to that is the pushback, right? The pushback from our kids and our students on why they can't have computers in their room, why they can't have a phone or social media at a certain age. And you've done really well just saying we're the parents, you are the parent and you are the one who gets to make those decisions.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a few weeks ago where, they don't determine when they get phones and social media. We do as their parents. We're the parents, not them. Grace got social media when she was 17. Kylie, who is 16, still doesn't have social media. And so you're trying to walk, man, we're trying to walk they were on the later end of phones. And so, man, it's hard. It's hard, isn't it? Like you're trying to navigate this so they have phones. What's that?
But the correlation is there's no question as to the correlation between skyrocketing rates of suicide, self-harm, drug and alcohol use, questioning gender identity, early sexual activity, and the advent of the handheld cell phone.
My goodness.
And I mean, I'll just be really transparent. Our oldest daughter was the first one in our house to get a phone, and she was sexually trafficked because she was vulnerable to the influence and to the privacy and the secret world and the value that is being taught to young women, where their value lies in their sexuality and their body. And she was incredibly vulnerable to that, given some stuff in her own story. But, that couldn't have happened if she didn't have a cell phone. And that was with us monitoring it. That was with us having really strict rules around it. So these aren't little risks that we're talking about exposing young people to. And keep in mind, the adult brain isn't fully formed until the age of 25, right? So we now know this. Your brain is still incredibly young and malleable until the age of 25. And so, we're giving adult responsibilities to adolescent brains.
Yeah, when I remember when the girls were little, I was listening to a podcast and it was talking about how you could have your kids in a bubble and totally protect them from everything, and the culture will still kind of seep in and influence them. And so obviously when you're talking technology, there's no bubble, but you don't even have, you've got to still be aware, even if your kids don't have technology, you still have to be aware.
Maybe attached to that, Dena, talk about what impact parents being on their phones is having on the mental health of children.
We met yesterday. That blew my mind.
Yeah, share that.
We came home and told our girls about it, and they said, we're taking notes for when we become parents.
Grace wrote that down. Yeah, the whole and when they're...
Okay, so you're all gonna hate me after this.
Dude. No, we're not.
I'll just tell you up front.
We need it, Dena.
We have an increasing rate amongst young people today in a psychological disorder called an attachment disorder. An attachment disorder, historically, we found in places like Russian orphanages where children were fed and kept warm, but had no face-to-face contact and no warmth and physical touch. These children died because of failure to thrive. The ones who didn't die developed what we call attachment disorders, where they're unable to form healthy, secure attachments with safe loved ones. If you sort of extrapolate that out into a child's future, not able to discern who is safe and who's not safe, not able to attach appropriately to safe caregivers, resistant to close connection, fearful of close connection. That's what attachment disorder looks like, along with some other criteria. We have growing rates of attachment disorders among middle-class American children today. So we're not talking about kids in orphanages or kids who've grown up in the poorest of poor places with war and violence around them. We're talking about kids whose parents spend all their time right here. And because I'm spending all my time right here, what I'm not doing is making eye contact with my children. And because I'm interacting in dialogue here, I'm not having face-to-face dialogue with my children. And because I'm always tied to this, I'm most responsive, and guilty as charged, not pointing fingers at anybody because I'm convicted by this all the time. I'm more responsive to this than I am to the 2-year-old. And when the 2-year-old has to say, Meme, 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 4 or 5 times to get my attention because I'm distracted by this, she's learning a lot about her value in the world. And when moms have newborn infants, right, what God designed was that tiny little baby would be, 6 inches for mom's face. And as we're feeding, we're making eye contact, and we're rocking, and we're cooing, and we're mimicking sounds and facial expressions. And that's how a child's brain literally is wired and grows, is through face-to-face contact. We now know that happens across the entire lifespan. So an infant is making new neural connections, new synapses are developing in the brain of an infant when she sees mommy's face. And a 101-year-old man is developing new synapses and new neurons when he sees the face of a loved one. Okay, we used to think, I grew up in the 80s, this is your brain, crack the egg, this, right? This is your brain on drugs, sort of a one and done kind of thing. And we still want kids to be afraid of drugs, like don't do drugs, it's a bad idea. But what we've come to understand is that the brain does heal. It does create new pathways. There are opportunities for new neurons to develop. Praise God, He's a healing God. However, when attachment doesn't occur like it's supposed to occur, it is very hard to get back. It is for some people impossible to get back because the thing that is meant to be the safest becomes the scariest thing. All that to say, our kids aren't getting attachment because we, as the grown-ups, spend more time looking at this than we do the face of our children.
Wow, so
do you hate me?
That's really challenges. And so it's not just what safeguards do I need to put around my kids or our grandkids, but what safeguards do I need to put around myself? Yep. And I don't know, what are some, is it that, any ideas or thoughts, you guys, on, again, no shame, we're all in this together, right? You know what I'm saying? Every one of us are guilty in this, and so we're just, we're amongst friends here.
I feel like I should be throwing away my cell phone.
Yeah.
Right?
What are some ideas? Is that being sure, okay, the phone is not with us at all times in the home, right? Our phone is put away. I mean, are these some ideas?
I think primarily we recognize that our phone is a tool, and you use a tool appropriately. I don't carry a shovel to the dinner table, right? And so, all right, I'm going to use it to do the things that I need to do, and then I'm going to put it away. We are not as great as we should be, but we've had a no phone at the table rule. Our kids' phones sleep overnight on the kitchen counter. They don't take them into their rooms with them. My husband and I have talked about, should we be doing that too? Like maybe our phones should not be in our room. And then you're like, well, but it's my white noise maker and it's my audiobook that I fall asleep to. And
my alarm clock.
Or it's my alarm clock, right? And so whether it's near you or not near you isn't the question so much as, are you more attached to your phone than you are your children? And there are practical things you can do to help safeguard that, but that's also that's a spiritual issue, right? This is where God needs to convict us and restore us to right relationship.
One thing that we've been doing for the last 3 years, we moved into our house 3 years ago, and we didn't have TV for the first 3 weeks. It hadn't gotten set up yet, so we didn't have it. And we went, 3 weeks with no TV, and we noticed that our kids were just they were playing, they were living their best life. They didn't miss it that much. And so when we finally got TV, we made this rule of, hey, we're not gonna watch, what would happen if we didn't watch TV Monday through Friday? And what we realized when my 9-year-old looks at me, at that time he was 6, and he goes, that means you guys too, right? And we were like, yeah. And it's been convicting and like a sacrifice for us too, because it's like, if they're not watching TV, if they watch us watching TV, it's kind of so unless they're very, very asleep for a short amount of time, we just don't have the TV on from Monday through Friday. And it has been incredible for our family, and so good for our kids so far. They probably will resent us and be up here at a midweek when they're 25 and say, I never had TV when I was little. But it's just been healthy.
We've got to give our kids a reason to go to therapy, right?
Right.
That's a good reason.
But I think it's been one of those, we have to be willing to do that too. And so I think with the phone rules, are parents willing to do what they're asking their kids to do sometimes, it's convicting for sure.
I read a real quick article the other day, and then we can move on, about the gift of boredom for children. When I was a kid, a million years ago, right, we would build tree houses, and we would play outside, and we would take our bikes on jumps, and we would do risky, stupid things. And I remember lighting things on fire. And, when children are bored, they have to be creative. They have to do things they wouldn't normally do. They have to venture out. They have to solve problems. Our kids these days don't have to solve problems because every answer is right here. And kids don't do as much physical exploring. Again, we have more kids receiving physical therapy today and occupational therapy because they don't have the fine motor skills that a previous generation did, because they're not doing risky things, right? They're not jumping off of cliffs. They're not swimming in the lake. They're not playing in the snow because they're here. One of the things socially we've seen is that parents feel safer when their children are in the basement on their phone than when they're around town doing something we don't know what they're doing. It's not true. They aren't safer, right? Because of what they can be exposed to here. But parents who are fearful and anxious tend to prefer the idea of my kid playing Xbox for 12 hours a day than my kid crashing his bike and knocking out his two front teeth. And that's us being anxious and then reinforcing that sort of social isolation that comes from exposure to games and phone.
Yeah. When we drove somewhere, we looked out the window for fun.
You might have talked to each other.
There we go. All right, ready for Q&A time? All right, we got here a bunch of questions here. We're gonna fire away here. And all right, how do you know the difference between mental illness and control by an evil spirit? And I do think there's a couple of things here is, you know, and certainly you guys can speak to this as well. We do know that a Christian cannot be possessed by a demon. So we know that, you know, for a fact. And so we can take, you know, great comfort in that. And also even, Kendra, right? I mean, when she was...
Yeah, I was in college and the professor, he was saying that his grandson had seizures. And he said a lot of times people would say, well, they knew about seizures through Bible stories of people that were possessed. And he's like, no, my grandson's not possessed. First of all, he's a Christian. And second of all, he said, evil spirits can't be controlled by medicine. Mm-hmm. And so that was helpful even in this arena too.
Yeah, you don't see Christians possessed by a demon in the Bible. And so, so anything else to add to that? So,
what if the person is not a Christian? And how would you discern if it is a mental illness or it is an evil spirit? Because we do know that is possible if they are not a believer. And maybe what does the person do if it's if it's someone that they know and they're not a Christian?
Carrie, what do you think?
Really easy question. Really easy question.
A couple different thoughts come to mind. One is the very real presence of addiction and the way that substances create chaotic, unpredictable, scary behaviors in loved ones. The recent piece of research that I came across was talking about people who have coexisting mental health disorders and addiction. For about 90% of that population, 3 to 6 months into sobriety, 90% of their mental health symptoms dissipate. So sometimes things that feel scary, unpredictable, strange, dark, is that combination of addiction and mental health issues. I think I would just add to that, sin is dark, right? And so when people are caught up in sin and when they are self-destructive or they are participating in things that don't lead to life, that's not necessarily the same as being possessed by a demon as it is that they're walking in darkness and they're allowing sin into their life. And so for me, I tend to assume first that there's some biological stuff going on, and then I secondly think, gosh, lifestyle, what's going on that we don't know about? People do really chaotic and scary things to manage shame, and it doesn't make sense for us from the outside looking in. But we all know people who've struggled with alcohol, pornography, other behaviors, cutting or whatever type of behaviors that alleviates pain, at least for the moment. And so I just think it's careful to distinguish between the ways that sin gets lived out in our life as opposed to demonic possession gets lived out.
Good. Okay, how can I help my daughter that just got diagnosed with ADHD, possible bipolar, has a family with children? And so maybe there's this question also, just if we have someone navigating, some mental health challenges, what's maybe some good pieces of advice for family members who want to come alongside to love them well?
I think the first thing we can do and the kindest thing we can do is not jump to give suggestions, right? When people are struggling and people are encountering unpredictable or unknown or new things, we're so anxious to help people that we tend to, have you tried this? Have you read this? Let me tell you about this. Like, here's a vitamin you should try. Like, we impulsively sort of try to fix things for people. And that often just compounds their shame and it compounds their sense of isolation, as opposed to just being able to say, I don't know what it's like, what you're going through, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here to listen. I don't have any advice, but I'm here. And then practically, like, is there anything you need? Like, you're walking through a hard time. Can I join you in some way? Do you need a meal? Do you need your house cleaned? Do you need, right? Just in the same way that we would encounter somebody who's had other crises in their life, as opposed to jumping in to tell people what to do.
So do something like maybe just a practical help. That's cool.
Yeah. The question about, navigating, is it an adult daughter with ADHD, it sounds like,
Yes.
and a disorder? Yeah.
ADHD, possible bipolar, has a family.
Yeah. I think one of the other things we do is we support them and direct them to appropriate healthcare, right? So instead of being maybe reserved about suggesting counseling or skeptical about it, that we this is when a licensed mental health counselor is essential. Let's get you good care. Do you know how to access care? I don't know how to access care, but we can find somebody who does know how to access care and encourage them along those paths of self-care. And then I think also recognizing that disorders that are organic, meaning genetic or biological, that person can't pray it away. They can't Bible study it away. They can't fellowship it away. Like, these are organic biological disorders. And so we come alongside somebody who may be struggling with a big diagnosis in the same way that we would come along somebody has an unexpected illness.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think a really helpful thing is that, in the same way, like you just said, that somebody might treat a broken arm. What would they do with their child if they had a broken arm? They would pray, and then they would go to a doctor, right? To help. And I think, when you are walking through that, what is the right way to find help? And I think there's a validation in that. Like, it's a very medical thing. And I think with the medication, if they are on medication, I think one of the things that's so helpful is I think oftentimes in our brain, especially as Christians, is I'll know that my family member or my loved one is better when they're not on medication anymore. That's when they're going to be better. And I think for some of those, I think accepting the fact that in the same way that somebody who has an underperforming thyroid that needs thyroid medication every day, if they have, type 1 diabetes, they need insulin every day because their pancreas doesn't produce insulin. Somebody might need something that they are chemically depleted of in their biology every day in order to function. And I think, a miracle and healing and medicine and counseling can coexist in a beautiful way for some of these types of issues.
Yeah, I think sometimes the miracle is that we have access to the type of medical care that we have access to. I mean, worldwide, people don't have what we have. And so the ability to be grateful to God. Yeah, and there's some things we know about how medication works, and there's some things we don't know about how medication works. Genetically, we're all different, and so some people will take a medication that works very effectively for them. Another person, it will actually trigger anxiety or trigger suicidality. That's not a failure of medication in general, that's just a side effect. And so we don't say, oh, meds are bad because I had a negative side effect. We go find a medication that works better with our personal biology. Around ADHD, let me just do a quick thing about that because I work with a lot of kids and adults who have ADHD. The medication that treats ADHD is a stimulant, and what it does is it increases blood and oxygen flow to the prefrontal cortex, which is the region of your brain where impulse control, cause and effect, logic, consequences, short-term working memory, basically everything that every 12-year-old boy on the planet doesn't have, right? I mean, the ADHD brain is the 12-year-old boy brain. Not that every 12-year-old boy has ADHD, but it's a good picture if you have any 12-year-olds in your life. Specifically, what stimulant medication does to treat ADHD is it increases blood and oxygen flow to the prefrontal cortex. If I were to take a stimulant, I'd be like on speed, okay? I would not feel good. It would not work well for me. I would lose a lot of weight. It would be I'd feel awful. For somebody who has ADHD, stimulants do the opposite, and it actually calms their central nervous system and it regulates their prefrontal cortex. One of the best ways that we assess for ADHD is, does the medicine work? If the medicine doesn't work, it's probably not ADHD. If the medication is effective, we know that what we've done is we've increased blood and oxygen flow to the prefrontal cortex because it wasn't working like it should have. That's a biologically based disorder.
Gotcha. Okay, kind of a bit to what we talked about a little bit earlier. It seems like there are many more obvious people in mental health crises than when I was growing up. Is that true, and why? And you would probably say, yes, that is true for some of the reasons we've outlined earlier.
So two things. One is that we just have a much greater awareness of mental health now than we ever have. And so it's like you buy a green Volvo and you start seeing green Volvos everywhere. We are more aware of it now. And so people tend to either self-diagnose or have other people ask them, hey, what's going on? Because we just have greater awareness. And that's a gift, right? People can get care sooner. Secondly, yeah, we do have a increasing number of people who struggle with mental health, and quite frankly, a lot of that has to do with decriminalization of drugs. And so the more people before the age of 25 who are exposed to marijuana use have an increased likelihood of experiencing mental health disorders. So psychoses that might be a genetic thing in your family can lie dormant your entire lifetime. Exposure to marijuana before the age of 25 triggers psychoses in people who would have otherwise never been triggered. So we have really minimalized the risk and the danger of marijuana as it's become socially more acceptable. What we're seeing is direct increases in paranoid schizophrenia, anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, directly related to how accessible and even socially acceptable weed use has become.
Wow. Yes?
Well, I was just going to mention, I think like the marijuana thing is like it's an extra behavior that factors into mental health. Would you say, Dena, that when we are going through seasons of mental health, whether it's situational, that it is important to look at things like our diet, things like
Absolutely.
sleep,
Yep.
things like all of the things that we can control,
Right.
alongside, what might be medically necessary, but how important is it to evaluate the whole piece and not just that piece?
Absolutely. That's back to that whole idea that we are mind, body, spirit, right? And we are not one or the other. We are a collective experience of all those things. The way that fatigue impacts mental health is you just can't even measure how significant that is, which is another problem with this, because we have kids who are getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep at night because they're spending hours and hours and hours on their phone, and so they're going to school exhausted. And that fatigue can actually trigger some underlying mental health issues as well. But yeah, here's the tension. Self-care is so essential for your mental health, for your spiritual health. Self-care becomes almost impossible when you're depressed or when you're struggling with anxiety. So it's sort of this chicken and the egg type thing. We know that self-care is essential to maintain mental health. It's also the first thing that's gonna fall off when you're struggling. And so that's another practical way that people can come around you. Hey, how's your water consumption? Have you been outside today? Have you interacted with people today? How have you fed yourself today? Like we do with our little bitty ones when they're having a hard time. Like, you need a bottle, a diaper change, and a nap.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes we need to care for ourselves the same way, right? Hey, have you eaten today? Have you had liquid today? How are your bowels today, right? Like just the basics of self-care that we would offer to a young child, but we so rarely offer to ourselves.
Yeah, that's good. This is I think, a really, really good question. How do you help someone who doesn't understand mental health problems, understand how to manage an older child, and I think this is the key part, to determine if the child is using mental health as an excuse to not take responsibility for their life, versus recognizing it's a real issue and helping walk through this issue to get to a place where they can manage their life successfully. So how do you navigate, let's say you've got an older child and you've got mental health, is it causing, debilitating challenges versus just not taking responsibility? That's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, I personally would say that regardless, it's a cry for help. So if that person is claiming that it's mental health that's keeping them from functioning, well, let's get that person help because something is disrupted in their life. Maybe it's mental health. And I probably have a broader concept of mental health, right? So what are the things that we go to avoid pain? What are the ways that we avoid doing hard things? What keeps us from doing what we know we should do? Those type of struggles. At the heart and soul level are about our wellness and our focus and our intention. I tend to see kids get missed because people think they're being dramatic or they think they're being, drawing attention to themselves or not wanting to do hard work or using it as an excuse. I think if you have a kid who's at that place, then I'd have concerns about that kid. I'd be like, well, let's get that kid help. I don't know if that answers the question, but for me, it's...
Are you ready for the lightning round? The lightning round. There's the lightning round. Okay, here we go. What are your thoughts on online counseling through sites like BetterHelp? What are your thoughts on online counseling through sites like BetterHelp?
I think it's a fantastic reality of accessing mental health today that we didn't have 10 years ago. I would say the same thing though. You screen that person, you ask the hard questions, you find that you have a connection. In my personal experience, because I'm 53, I prefer face-to-face. We have an entire generation though that is completely comfortable and fluent in a virtual encounter and they find it as meaningful, as significant as I do face-to-face. So.
Okay, what are some major signs to look for in my 15-year-old daughter that scream anxiety, depression, that would differentiate her from just being a homebody or lazy? So 15-year-old daughter, depression, anxiety versus just homebody, lazy. What am I looking for as a parent?
We tend to screen kids for, have they isolated? Have they cut off relationships? Are they not pursuing things that previously gave them joy and interest? So when you see somebody ending relationships, cutting out activities, and not finding joy in things that used to bring them joy, that's when we get concerned.
Okay, what are possible signs of childhood self-hate?
The biggest one is acting out in rage. So when you have children who are acting out contemptfully, they're fighting with you, they're contradicting you, they're screaming at their teachers, they're basically taking all that internal hatred and they're directing it at the people around them. And so instead of just going, that's a nasty kid, or that's a naughty kid, or that's a bad kid, we want to be going, what is that kid holding that is so painful that the only thing he or she can do with it is say, you hold it. Here, this is what I'm feeling inside. You hold it. So.
Gotcha. Can it be normal for a child to not often ever say, I'm such a bad kid, or I'm the worst? If this is not normal, is it a flag for me as his mom to maybe seek out counsel or help him in a specific way? Of course, I speak life and truth in him. So you've got a child, not often, but they might, I'm such a bad kid. Yeah. Is that normal, or is that a red flag that I need to be aware of as a parent?
So sometimes that's just temperament and personality. I would say that normal in the sense that it might happen occasionally. You know, what we want to do, of course, is correct that and speak the truth to that. And then also, you know, we want to be curious about what's behind that. So, are you having big feelings? Do you want to talk about big feelings? Is there something going on at school that you're uncomfortable with? Is somebody saying something to you in ballet class that hurt? You know, like, so actually being really curious with that kid. I think for sure speaking the truth of who they are in God's image and how He made them and how He sees them as valuable, and being curious about, what's going on there.
You said this yesterday, make the home a safe place to feel intense emotions. I think that it can be hard sometimes as parents. We've got 2 boys, and you kind of ride that line of you want emotion, but also it's like, okay, like we're gonna stop crying now, right? Like we're gonna rally, we're gonna get it together. But what's that line of, hey, we're gonna get it together, and hey, what's going on? And I think I'm so grateful for the Holy Spirit, who, as best as He can, we have no parenting manual, right? We have the Word of God, but other than that, no one gave us instruction manuals when we had our kids, and they're all so different. But I think just that discernment of like, just taking those moments to be like, Lord, is there something deeper going on here? Is there another question I need to ask? Is this a time where it's kind of more of a tantrum and we need to like get up and move on and nip it? Or is this a moment where like there's something else going on, let's talk about it? And do they feel safe to share that?
And I would say, I can't give you a statistical analysis here, but the vast majority of women that I work with will tell me they grew up in a home where their feelings were not welcome, or it wasn't safe to be anything other than happy or grateful. So if they ever got mad, if they ever got sad, if they were ever jealous, and let's just all acknowledge those are normal feelings, they were shamed, they were shut down, or their parents' emotions took up all the oxygen in the room. So there was a message that it wasn't okay for the kids to ever have strong emotions because mom just can't really tolerate that. Dad just had a hard day, right? So if kids don't have the freedom to express good and bad emotions, they tend to internalize that, and that shows up in either self-harm or hatred directed at others.
There are several podcasts that cover mental strength. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have any recommendations for a good one? None of the ones I found are biblically driven. So podcasts that cover mental strength, I'm not familiar with those.
No, I guess I'm not really sure what's meant by the term. I'd be happy to look into it if somebody wants to ask me later.
Okay, gotcha. Go ahead, sweetie.
Oh, and for us with little girls, we have talked about, there's this person named Sissy Goff who is a Christian counselor, and she has a podcast, and there's a guy that's on there too, Raising Boys and Girls podcast. And she's written some different books and stuff like that. And when I've listened to her, for the most part, she sounds pretty good. So
cool.
It's a resource.
Gotcha. Yeah. Sissy Goff.
There's a book called Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. If you have sons, that was huge for my husband and I, just about like boys' emotions. And then I think one just practical thing that we heard from somebody else, we did not come up with this, that we do around our dinner table is high-low buffalo. And it's a way to like talk about emotions, but just in a really casual way. So everyone around the table at dinner is name a high from your day, a low from your day, and then buffalo is something random. It can be funny, it can be this kid did this at school today, but it's a high, what was really high, and then what was something that was low. And low, for a kindergartner, could be I had to turn my chair around because I was talking too much, right? It's not really deep stuff, but it's just an opportunity. What's a high, what's a low, and then buffalo, we get a kick out of.
And you're creating an emotionally safe environment and training your children to put words to their emotions, to identify their emotions, and that emotional intelligence is actually pretty foundational for later mental health.
There you go.
We'll keep doing it.
Good job. Good job.
Feeling good about that, aren't you? How do you know when you have anxiety?
Clinically, the symptoms are pretty straightforward. People tend to experience irritability. They tend to have restlessness. They might have stomach problems or muscle tension. It can be a feeling of speeding up. It can be a feeling of not being able to keep up. For a lot of people who experience anxiety, there's the brain is running really fast all the time and they just can't seem to slow it down. For us who grew up that way, you don't know that's not normal until you hit the wall one day. And so I think that a lot of us live with low-level anxiety just because it's our temperament, it's our culture, and it's not until maybe you hit some crisis moments that you're like, oh yeah, that's actually not very manageable anymore.
Gotcha. Really good here. How does a spouse help their spouse going through anxiety and depression, especially if they don't understand what they're feeling? Yeah. And so maybe a little bit to what you spoke about a little bit earlier about the support and family, but if you have a spouse.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest gifts that you can give your spouse is curiosity. What's that like for you? So don't assume and don't jump to conclusions. Is compassion. Even though I don't know what that's like for you, I can see you're hurting. I'm here for you, I care for you. And then I think getting informed about mental health is also a good way to support your spouse, because you can enter into dialogue. I think what I see sometimes are like one partner or another will go do some counseling, which is great. It's very courageous. But then they tend to have experiences and growth and insight that maybe the non-anxiety person doesn't. And so we want to help partners stay on the same page as they're exploring and growing and healing, so that they're doing that together.
What's the best parental app for monitoring devices? Any thoughts?
Yeah, there's some good ones. Bark is a good one, B-A-R-K. There's another one that's more specific to pornography or images called Covenant Eyes. Mm-hmm. There's Custodio is one that we've used most recently. There's a lot out there right now
we use
that you
Covenant
can
Eyes here at
access.
the church. Mm-hmm. Did you want to mention something, Kayla?
Yeah, I think with spouses walking through, I think not neglecting the help that they need personally too, because I know that oftentimes that can be the thing that gets kind of left on the shelf, is everything goes into helping your spouse through that season. So I think even the spouse, surrounding yourself with a support system of people, someone that you can talk to, and then when you've maybe come up for air a little bit, doing the work yourself, because you've talked about how secondary trauma can be just as impactful as primary trauma. So somebody can experience just as much trauma, especially a spouse, as the person who's actually experiencing the trauma. And to say, it didn't happen to me, so I don't need help, could be really detrimental in the future. So I think for them to be willing to do the work too.
All right, here we go. How do you do a screen time decrease or quit cold turkey with kids who had a lot of screen time in the first few years of their life? How do you support them? So just
Well, you start by humbling yourself and apologizing.
Okay.
I should have not let this happen. I'm sorry. I failed you in this way. I'm changing the rules, and that's going to be so uncomfortable for all of us. Because I think there's just a place of
good.
humility.
Amen.
Like it's just,
that is so good.
Like humility and leadership, right?
Yeah.
And then I think, you explain why you're doing what you're doing. You find alternatives. Hey, we're actually going to have to play board games together. I hate board games so much. We're going to have to cook together. We're going to have to go for a walk together. We're going to have to ride bikes together. I can't just take something away and then not replace it with anything.
Gotcha.
That's not fair.
Are we seeing an increase in dysfunctional marriages as a result of technology?
That's interesting. I have not seen that particular set of research. I would have a hard time saying no, just because we all have our go-to to avoid conflict or to avoid connection when things are unwell. It's a great question.
Okay, gotcha. Let's see here. What do you do when a child who is traumatized by grief and loss attaches to every person they run into?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's called an indiscriminate attachment, and it's a response to trauma. First of all, I would just say it's a very natural and normal thing to do. It's also not a healthy thing to do. So we have a lot of natural, normal responses that aren't necessarily healthy. In those situations, and I speak from experience because our first son came to us with an indiscriminate attachment. He would go to anybody at any time. I really had to put in some really strict boundaries with all of my friends and family members. He comes to me for comfort. He comes to me to get his needs met. You can't jump in and be an attachment figure for him, or else he won't attach to me. And so especially in little ones, we tell people, well-intentioned, kind people, you can't be his attachment figure, back off.
So someone here is saying they have some fear about letting their kids go explore on their own. Like, what if they get kidnapped? If they go and explore, I'm guessing physically here, the fear that leads to a child playing video games for 12 hours a day instead of riding a bike on their own. Mm-hmm. And I think, like you said just a little bit earlier, that's probably more dangerous than...
Statistically, it's a lot more dangerous. The rate of child abduction has not increased in the last 40 years. The rate of children experiencing suicidality and eating disorders and sexual behaviors has increased exponentially.
Okay. Does seeking help or medication for mental health issues indicate a lack of trust in God that God will bring about my healing?
I would answer that the same way that I answer my son, who's a type 1 diabetic. He's going to be dependent on insulin, not because God doesn't want to heal his pancreas, but at least in this physical realm, God does not heal type 1 diabetics. And so like the recognition that God has put resources in place to care for us, not always through direct healing, I actually think sometimes requires more trust. People like the idea of deliverance from addiction, for example, and praise God for when that happens. For those people, though, who actually have to do the hard, long-term, disciplined work of recovery, being in community, being vulnerable, being transparent, that requires a heck of a lot more out of them than deliverance does. Likewise, doing the hard work of counseling and getting medications on board, like that actually requires you to surrender and submit in ways that perhaps hoping for healing would be a faster, quicker, easier path.
Yeah, I do it a little bit like if I break my arm, I'm praying that God would heal it, bring it back to health and wholeness, but I'm also going to go to the doctor.
I'm also going to go to the doctor.
And get a cast.
Yeah. It's not an either or would be my answer. Yeah.
I trust in the healing power of God, but what if you don't trust Western medicine and the process in the country, but your body's depleted in areas where you need medicine every day? So healing power of God, struggling to trust and kind of the...
I mean, and we see all the failures of our medical system, and we're well aware of that. And so there's a good reason to, of course, be skeptical. And I would just say that's part of our responsibility then to get informed, to read, to talk to people, to become more confident in the path that we're taking. I have a lot of people who are resistant to medication, and they'll first try homeopathic solutions, and they'll try diet, and they'll try exercise, and goodness gracious, please do that. And for the 10% that's really effective, praise God. For the 85 to 90% that ends up not being enough, that's when we lay down some of our pride.
Okay, is there a connection between mental health and the food and self-care products we consume every day? So talk to us about food and mental health.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research about the way that we have the refined processed sugars, the amount of fast foods, the lack of whole foods, changes everything about our body. So again, body, soul, spirit, right? It's not just one. So there is a lot to be said for self-care that is around how you feed yourself. We live in a really fast culture where not a lot of people cook food, right? We grab something, we throw something in the microwave. And I think we're seeing the side effect of that both physically and emotionally.
Okay, how do you explain to someone what depression or anxiety is if they don't believe in it? Two more questions after this.
They don't believe in it. I mean, it's sort of like not believing in gravity. You're gonna fall, right? Like it exists, and generally people who have experienced it believe in it, and because they've encountered that wall that they bump up against, or they're in that pit that they can't dig themselves out of. When I work with people, they're usually at the point of, I've tried everything else and nothing is working. Those aren't weak people, and those aren't people who haven't tried hard. Those are people who are at the end of their rope, and they're finally getting care. And I think that's so courageous. That doesn't really answer the question, but there's just, I mean, we live in an age where there's so much information available to us that people who want to believe are going to believe, and people who don't want to are going to
Is there an impact that discipline and spanking have on mental health? Or does discipline and spanking minimize mental health? And
Well, so yes and no. Spanking done in anger and spanking done violently is abusive. Abuse harms children. Children who've been exposed to trauma and abuse, spanking is detrimental to their feelings of safety and connection and attachment and bonding. We started out parenting our children, and we would spank their bottoms, and then we brought home kids who experienced trauma before they came into our bome, and we should not spank those children, right? So knowing your own child is really, really important. If that child's already been exposed to trauma or harm, spanking is experienced differently by them than children who haven't. Likewise, I have 3 girls, 2 have no trauma. One of them, we spanked as a young girl. She got so mad. She dug in and she just got pissed. And I'm like, spanking's not real effective for this kid. The other one, her heart softened, she repented, we reconnected. So I don't think it's a yes or no, a right or wrong, except for when children haven't been exposed to trauma, in which case we just can't spank them.
Is there any food group or ingredient that you think is a no-no that could somehow impact kids? Any food ingredient or food?
I mean, there's just tons of research around red dye. It's just really, it's awful for us. We should not be eating it. It's illegal in most European countries right now. Processed sugar is ridiculous for our bodies, and the way that we don't consume real foods but consume processed foods instead is detrimental to every aspect of gut health. And we now understand that the majority of serotonin that is produced, serotonin being a chemical that helps regulate mood, is produced in your gut, not in your brain. And so, gut health is really important.
Observe any child who has consumed too much sugar, and you will see how they are acting, right? Like they're just off the wall. It affects, if anyone can say that too much sugar doesn't affect their mood, their behavior, their emotions. I mean, literally just all of a sudden they're happy, they're crying. And it's just like, oh, you've had a really bad diet for the last few days. And I think one thing that's helpful is red dye number 40 is hidden in so many foods that we don't even realize that are not red. And so I think it's good for, I don't think we live in a world where it's really hard to completely be away from it completely and entirely. You can do that. But I think to just be aware of, the average child is supposed to be consuming 6 teaspoons of sugar a day, and there's 30 something of them in a can of Coke, so it's pretty eye-opening when you start to look at that and then what impact it could have on their behavior.
Yeah. And it's a lot of work. Gosh, it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah. Can we express our gratitude to Dena for tonight and just sharing her thoughts? And that's so good, so good, so good. Thankful. Would you close us in prayer?
Yeah, we just want to thank you, Lord, for tonight. God, we want to thank you for these kinds of conversations. And God, we thank you that you are the one who created us and that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. But God, we just stand here tonight recognizing that we are broken and we are flawed. But God, we are not without hope. And so, God, I pray tonight, God, that we would leave with a feeling of hope. God, that you are with us when we are struggling with anxiety. God, that you're with us when we're struggling with depression. God, when we're trying to parent kids and grandkids and walk them through their struggles, God, you are with us. And I just pray that we would just experience your presence. God, I pray that we would know that we are not alone. God, that we're in a community where we are walking this out together. And God, you are more than able to heal, to come alongside, to give us resources. And so, God, we just ask that we would be filled with hope, filled with peace, Lord, because you're our God, you're our healer, you're our Savior. And God, you always provide us resources and support. And so, God, we just thank you. We love you. And we thank you for these moments. And in Jesus' name, amen.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great one. Bless you.